"Tell me where they are, old man, or I take another finger." Eric Crawford pressed the blade against his uncle's hand, watching the blood drip onto the frozen cabin floor. Henry Crawford, 82 years old, who were chained to a rusted bed frame for 3 months, looked up at his nephew with eyes that had seen worse in Vietnam. "You can take them all," Henry whispered. "I'll never tell you." Eric smiled. It was the smile of a man who had stopped being human long ago. 300 miles away, a German shepherd named Ranger was dying in a snowbank, a bullet in his shoulder, dragging himself toward the only hope he had left: a stranger's cabin, a veteran named Marcus Cole, and a connection that would unravel 50 years of FUP secrets. What Marcus would find in that remote cabin would change everything he thought he knew about his family, about love, and about how far evil can hide behind a familiar face. Before we begin this incredible journey, I invite you to subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the very end. And please, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. Now let us begin. Marcus Cole hadn't spoken to another human being in 12 days. He counted them. 12 days since he drove up the mountain road to his grandfather's cabin. 12 days since he turned off his phone, ignored his sister's calls, and decided that maybe the world was better off without him in it. The cabin sat deep in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana, surrounded by pine trees so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. His grandfather William had left it to him 2 years ago, along with a letter Marcus still couldn't bring himself to read. "You'll know when you're ready, Haboon," the lawyer had said. Marcus wasn't ready. He wasn't sure he'd ever be ready. At 34 years old, Marcus Cole had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a Marine captain. He had led men into battle. He had made decisions that cost lives and saved others. He had been called a hero by people who had never held a dying soldier in their arms. 6 months ago, an IED had changed everything. The explosion killed 4 members of his squad. Marcus survived because he had stepped away to check the perimeter. 30 seconds. That's all it was. 30 seconds that separated him from the men who trusted him, who followed him, who died while he lived. The shrapnel they couldn't remove sat lodged near his spine. The VA doctor said he was lucky. Lucky to walk. Lucky to breathe. Lucky to be alive. Marcus didn't feel lucky. He felt like a ghost wearing a living man's skin. The blizzard had been raging for 3 days when he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind. The cabin creaked and groaned under the assault of the storm, and Marcus had grown used to strange sounds in the night. He had also grown used to not sleeping, to staring at the ceiling while the faces of dead men floated behind his eyes. But this sound was different. Scratching. Weak. Desperate. Coming from the front door. Marcus reached for the pistol he kept beside his bed. Old habits. The kind that kept you alive in combat zones and made you paranoid everywhere else. He moved silently across the cabin floor, his bare feet cold against the wood, his heart beating with the familiar rhythm of approaching danger. The scratching stopped. Then started again. Weaker this time. Marcus positioned himself beside the door weapon ready. He had survived ambushes in Kandahar. He had cleared buildings in Fallujah. Whatever was on the other side of that door, he would be ready. He pulled it open. The German shepherd collapsed at his feet, and for a moment Marcus forgot how to breathe. The dog was covered in blood. Its fur was matted with ice and something darker. Its breathing came in short, ragged gasps that spoke of injuries too severe for any animal to survive. But its eyes, amber, intelligent, desperate, locked onto Marcus with an intensity that made him take a step back. "Hey, Marcus said, his voice rough from disuse. "Hey, easy." The dog tried to stand. Its legs buckled. It fell back into the snow that had blown onto the porch, and a sound escaped its throat that wasn't quite a whine. It was something closer to a plea. Marcus's first instinct was to close the door. He had come here to be alone. He had come here to figure out if living was still something he wanted to do. He couldn't take care of himself. How the hell was he supposed to save a dying animal? But then the dog looked at him again, and Marcus saw something he recognized. He had seen that look in the eyes of his men. The look of someone fighting to survive against impossible odds. The look that said, "I'm not ready to give up yet." "Damn it," Marcus muttered. He holstered his pistol and knelt in the snow. The dog weighed at least 80 pounds, but when Marcus lifted it, the animal felt too light, like something had been slowly draining the life out of it for a long time. The dog didn't resist. It pressed against Marcus's chest as if it had finally found safety after a long, terrible journey. A journey Marcus couldn't begin to understand, not yet. He carried the dog inside and laid it on the floor near the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across the cabin walls, illuminating the full extent of the animal's injuries. Marcus had been a combat medic before he became an officer. He knew wounds. He knew the difference between damage caused by nature and damage caused by something else. These wounds were not from nature. The lacerations across the dog's ribcage were too clean, too precise. No animal had made these cuts. Someone had used a blade. Someone had taken their time. The burn marks on the hindquarters were deliberate, circular, the kind of burns you get from a heated metal rod pressed against flesh. And the bullet wound in the left shoulder was partially healed, which meant this dog had been shot at least a week ago. Shot and then somehow survived. Shot and then somehow found its way through miles of frozen wilderness to scratch at a stranger's door. "Who did this to you?" Marcus whispered, his hands moving carefully over the dog's body. "Who the hell did this to you?" The dog whimpered softly but didn't move. It watched Marcus with those amber eyes, patient and knowing, as if it understood that this man was its only chance. Marcus found the collar half buried under matted fur, worn leather cracked with age but still intact. A small metal tag hung from it, tarnished but readable. One word, Ranger. "Ranger, Garrett," Marcus said, testing the name. The dog's ears twitched. Its tail moved once against the floor. "Okay, Ranger, let's see what we can do." Marcus worked through the night. He cleaned the wounds with antiseptic from his first aid kit, stitched the deepest cuts with supplies he'd brought from the VA hospital, and applied antibiotics to prevent infection. The bullet wound was beyond his ability to treat. The slug was still lodged in the shoulder, but the tissue around it showed no signs of sepsis. Whatever else had happened to this dog, its body was fighting to survive. Throughout the process, Ranger remained still. Unnaturally still. As if it understood that Marcus was helping. As if it had been trained to endure pain without complaint. Military training, Marcus realized. This dog had been trained by someone who knew what they were doing. By dawn, Ranger was sleeping fitfully by the fire. Marcus sat in the armchair nearby, too exhausted to move, too wired to sleep. He watched the dog's chest rise and fall, counting each breath like a small victory. "Whatever you're running from," he said quietly, "you're safe now." The irony wasn't lost on him. He had come to this cabin to run from his own demons. Now he was offering sanctuary to another wounded soul. Maybe that's how it worked. Maybe you couldn't save yourself until you tried to save someone else. The storm raged for another day. Marcus stayed close to Ranger, feeding him softened jerky and water, changing his bandages, monitoring his temperature. The dog's strength returned slowly, and with it something else emerged. An obsession. Every few hours, Ranger would struggle to his feet and limp to the window that faced northeast. He would stand there, staring into the forest, whining softly. Then he would look back at Marcus with those knowing eyes, before returning to rest by the fire. "There's nothing out there but snow and trees," Marcus told him. But Ranger wouldn't stop. The behavior grew more insistent with each passing hour. Pawing at the window. Soft barks that seemed deliberately restrained. A desperation that Marcus couldn't explain. On the third day, the blizzard finally broke. Marcus stood at the window watching Ranger's fixation on the forest. The dog's wounds were healing, but his agitation was increasing. Something was out there. Something Ranger knew about. Something he needed Marcus to understand. "You want to go out in this?" Marcus asked. "You can barely walk." Ranger barked once. Sharp, decisive. Then he limped to the door and looked back at Marcus expectantly. Marcus thought about all the times he had looked away. All the times he had told himself that something wasn't his problem. All the times he had chosen the easy path instead of the right one. He thought about the men who died because he stepped away for 30 seconds. "All right," he said, "but we're doing this my way." He packed his go bag with military precision. First aid kit. Emergency rations. Satellite messenger, he'd forgotten to charge it, but maybe there was enough battery for one signal. Hunting rifle. His service pistol. Survival gear. If whatever had hurt Ranger was still out there, Marcus intended to be ready. They left the cabin at noon when the winter sun was at its highest. Ranger moved with surprising determination, following a path invisible to Marcus's eyes, but clear to the dog's instincts. Every few minutes he would stop and look back, making sure Marcus was still following. The forest swallowed them within minutes. Marcus maintained his situational awareness, marking their route mentally, most like watching for landmarks. The military training that had become second nature served him well now, each sense heightened, each step deliberate. 2 hours into their trek, he noticed the first marker. 3 parallel scratches on a tree trunk, too uniform to be natural, too deliberate to be coincidence. "Someone made these," Marcus said, tracing the marks with his gloved fingers. Ranger barked softly and continued walking. 20 yards later, Marcus found another tree with identical markings, then another. A trail through trackless wilderness created by someone who knew these mountains, Who had marked this path and why? The temperature dropped as they climbed higher. Marcus's old wound throbbed, the shrapnel pressing against nerves. He wasn't in the shape he'd been in before the explosion. The VA rating of 70% disability wasn't just a number, it was a daily reality. But Ranger wouldn't slow down. Every time Marcus faltered, the dog returned to him, pressing against his leg, offering support, then moving forward again. Always forward. 4 hours into their journey, as daylight began to fade, they crested a small ridge. Marcus stopped breathing. In the valley below, barely visible through the trees, sat a cabin. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, thin and gray against the darkening sky. But that wasn't what made Marcus's blood run cold. It was the chain. Even from this distance, he could see it. A heavy chain wrapped around the cabin's front door, secured with a padlock. Chained from the outside. Someone wasn't keeping people out. Someone was keeping someone in. Ranger's entire body trembled. Not from cold, not from exhaustion, from something else entirely. His eyes were fixed on that cabin with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "You know that place," Marcus said. "Don't you?" Ranger whimpered and took a step forward, then looked back at Marcus, waiting. Marcus checked his rifle. Verified the round in the chamber, confirmed his pistol was accessible. Then he followed the dog down the ridge, befitting toward whatever waited in that cabin. The approach took longer than expected. Marcus circled the perimeter, assessing the situation with tactical precision. No vehicles. Fresh boot prints in the snow, but several hours old. The chain and padlock were heavy-duty industrial grade, and there was something else. A dark stain in the snow near the back of the cabin. Marcus knelt beside it, brushing away the fresh powder. Blood. Frozen blood. And not from an animal. Ranger scratched at the cabin's front door, his whimpers growing more urgent. Marcus examined the padlock. Old but sturdy. He pulled out his multi-tool and went to work. 3 tense minutes of picking and prying before the mechanism finally gave way. The chain fell to the snow with a muffled clank. Marcus pushed the door open, rifle raised. The smell hit him first. Decay. Human waste. Sickness. The unmistakable scent of suffering that Marcus knew too well from field hospitals and mass casualty events. The cabin's interior was a nightmare. Filthy conditions, no proper sanitation for weeks. Empty food cans scattered across the floor. Medical waste everywhere, bloody bandages, empty pill bottles, used syringes. And something else. Something that made Marcus's combat-trained instincts scream. A door at the back of the cabin partially open. Ranger rushed forward, disappearing into the darkness beyond. Marcus followed his rifle, leading the way. What he found in that back room would haunt him for the rest of his life. An old man lay on a rusted metal bed, his wrist handcuffed to the frame. He was emaciated, his skin gray and papery, his white hair wild around his head. His breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps that spoke of pneumonia and worse. But the truly horrifying part was what Marcus saw when he looked closer. The man's hands were bandaged, both of them, and when Marcus carefully unwrapped the cloth, he found burns. Deliberate burns, on every fingertip, and on the right hand where the pinky finger should have been, there was only a neat surgical stump, recently healed. Someone had cut off this man's finger. On the wall above the bed, written in what could only be dried blood, were 7 words. "Tell me or lose another one." Marcus felt his legs weaken. He had seen terrible things in Afghanistan. He had witnessed the aftermath of suicide bombings and discovered mass graves. But this was different. This was torture. Deliberate, methodical torture. In a remote cabin in the Montana wilderness. On American soil. Ranger had jumped onto the bed and was licking the old man's face, whimpering with something that sounded disturbingly like grief. The dog clearly knew this person. Loved this person. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Sir, can you hear me?" The old man's eyes fluttered open, pale blue clouded with confusion and pain. They focused slowly on Marcus, then widened with fear. "No," the old man whispered. "No, please, not again. I won't tell you. I'll never tell you." "I'm not here to hurt you," Marcus said quickly. "My name is Marcus Cole. Your dog found me. Ranger, he led me here." At the sound of the dog's name, something changed in the old man's expression. The fear faded, replaced by something else. Hope. "Ranger," he breathed. "He's alive. He got away." "He did, and he found me. Now I'm going to get you out of here, but first I need to know who did this to you." The old man's eyes drifted closed. His strength was fading fast. "My nephew," he whispered. Eric did this." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Nephew. This wasn't a random crime. This was family. "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why would your nephew do this?" but the old man had slipped back into unconsciousness, his breathing growing weaker by the minute. Marcus found the keyring hanging on a nail by the doorway. After trying several keys, he finally unlocked the handcuff and freed the old man's wrist. The skin beneath was raw scabbed, worn down to the bone from months of futile struggle. He needed to warm this man, stabilize him, get help. But first, he needed information. On the rickety table in the main room, Marcus found a leather-bound journal. The handwriting inside was shaky, but legible, the entries spanning 3 months. The first entry was dated October 3rd. Eric came today. Said he wanted to talk about family business. I was fool enough to let him in. I woke up here chained to this bed. He says I have something that belongs to him. The documents, the mining claims. He doesn't understand that they're not mine to give. Half belongs to Eleanor. It always has. October 15th. Eric used a hot poker today. My hands will never be the same. But I won't tell him. Those documents are all I have left of her. November 3rd, and he took my finger, used a surgical blade, made me watch, said he learned how to do it on the internet. He was smiling the whole time. November 28th. Eric shot Ranger today. The dog tried to protect me. I heard the gunshot, heard Ranger's cry, and then nothing. I pray to God he got away. I pray to God someone finds me before Eric comes back. December 15th. So cold now. Fire almost out. Eric hasn't come in 4 days. Maybe he's waiting for me to die. Eleanor, my love, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I never found you. I'm sorry I stopped looking. I'll see you soon. Marcus set down the journal, his hands trembling. Eleanor. The name echoed in his mind, triggering something he couldn't quite grasp. Something important. Something just out of reach. He turned back to check on the old man and found him awake again, watching Marcus with those pale blue eyes. You writ it, the old man said. It wasn't a question. I needed to understand what happened here. Your name is Henry. Henry Crawford, and you're Marcus Cole. The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. Cole, that name means something. It's a common name. No. Henry said, his voice growing stronger, despite his weakness. No, it's not. Not to me. Before Marcus could respond, Ranger's head snapped toward the front of the cabin. A low growl rumbled in the dog's throat, the first aggressive sound Marcus had heard from the gentle animal. Someone was coming. Marcus grabbed his rifle and positioned himself beside the bedroom doorway. Through the cabin's front window he could see movement, a figure approaching through the trees. It's him, Henry whispered. It's Eric. He's come back. The front door opened. A man stepped inside, stamping snow from his expensive boots. Middle-aged, bearded, wearing outdoor gear that cost more than most people earned in a month. He was carrying a small pack and didn't immediately notice that anything was wrong. Well, old man, the newcomer called out, removing his gloves. Ready to talk today. I brought my tools again. Thought we might have some fun with your other hand. The casual cruelty in his voice made Marcus's finger tighten on the trigger. This was Eric Crawford. This was the monster who had tortured his own uncle for 3 months. Cut off his finger, shot his dog, left him to freeze to death. Eric finally looked up and saw the open bedroom door. Saw Marcus standing there with a rifle. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Eric smiled. Well, he said. This is unexpected. Who might you be? Step back, Marcus ordered. Hands where I can see them. Eric raised his hands slowly, but the smile never left his face. No need for that. I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. I'm Eric Crawford. That's my Uncle Henry in there. Poor man has dementia. Gets confused. I've been taking care of him. By chaining him to a bed, by torturing him. Torture? Eric's eyes widened with practiced innocence. Is that what he told you? The man has episodes. He becomes violent. The restraints are for his own safety. Ranger emerged from the bedroom, hackles raised teeth bared. A sound came from his throat that was more wolf than dog. Eric's facade cracked slightly when he saw the animal. That dog should be dead. He's not. And neither is your uncle, but you are going to prison for what you did to them. Eric studied Marcus for a long moment. Then he laughed. Prison, do you know who I am? Do you know what's at stake here? I know you're a man who cuts off old men's fingers and shoots dogs. That's all I need to know. Those mining claims are worth $18 million, Eric said, his voice dropping to something cold and businesslike. $18 million. With modern extraction technology, the gold in those mountains is finally accessible. It was supposed to be my inheritance, my birthright, but Uncle Henry refuses to tell me where he hid the original documents. And that justifies torture. It justifies whatever is necessary. Eric's hand moved slowly toward his jacket pocket. I've been at this for 3 months. I'm not going to let some stranger ruin everything now. Marcus saw the movement. recognized it. Don't. But Eric was already pulling a pistol from his pocket. Combat instincts took over. Marcus surged forward using his rifle barrel to knock Eric's arm upward as the gun discharged. The bullet splintered the ceiling. In the same motion, Marcus drove his shoulder into Eric's chest, slamming him against the doorframe. Ranger attacked, clamping his jaws around Eric's wrist. The man screamed in pain and dropped his pistol. Marcus kicked the weapon across the floor and pressed his rifle against Eric's throat. "That was a mistake," he said quietly. Eric glared at him, blood dripping from his wounded wrist. "You have no idea what you've done. No idea who you're dealing with." "I'm dealing with a man who tortures elderly family members for money. I've dealt with worse." "Have you?" Eric smiled through his pain. "Ask Henry about Eleanor. Ask him what happened 50 years ago. Ask him why he's been living alone in these mountains searching for a ghost." The name again, Eleanor. Something clicked in Marcus's memory. "What do you know about Eleanor?" he demanded. But before Eric could answer, Henry's voice came from the bedroom. Weak, desperate. "Marcus Cole. Your grandfather was William Cole, wasn't he?" Marcus turned slightly, was keeping his rifle on Eric. "Yes, how did you know that?" "Because William Cole's brother was married to Eleanor Porter, and Eleanor Porter was the woman I was engaged to before Vietnam, the woman I've been searching for my entire life." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him. His grandmother? His grandmother's name before she married into the Cole family had been Eleanor Porter. "That's impossible," he said. "No," Henry whispered. "It's fate. It's 50 years of fate finally coming together. Your grandmother was my Eleanor, and you're her grandson." Eric laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "Family reunion. How touching. But it doesn't change anything. Those documents belong to me. The money belongs to me. And if you think I'm going to let some long-lost relative get in my way, you're sadly mistaken." "You're not going anywhere except prison," Marcus said. "Am I?" Eric's eyes flicked to something behind Marcus. "Are you sure about that?" Marcus spun just as Eric lunged for a kerosene lantern on the shelf. "Let me talk to my uncle alone," Eric snarled, holding the lantern above his head, "or I burn this whole place down, with all of us inside it." Marcus aimed his rifle at Eric's chest. "You're bluffing." "Try me." Eric produced a lighter from his pocket. $18 million. That's what I'm fighting for. What are you fighting for? Marcus thought about his grandmother, about the cabin she had left him, about the 50 years of secrets that were suddenly unraveling. "I'm fighting for family," he said, "something you clearly don't understand." Eric flicked the lighter. What happened next took only seconds. Marcus dove forward as Eric threw the lantern. Ranger lunged for Eric's legs. The lantern smashed against the floor, and fire erupted across the dry wooden planks. Eric scrambled for the fallen pistol. Marcus tackled him before he could reach it. They crashed through the burning cabin, trading blows as the flames spread around them. Ranger was barking frantically from the bedroom doorway. Henry was calling Marcus's name. The fire was growing, feeding on decades-old timber, filling the cabin with smoke. Marcus landed a solid punch to Eric's jaw, stunning him long enough to grab his collar and slam him against the wall. "Go," Eric laughed through bloody teeth. "Save the old man. By the time you get him out, I'll be gone, and you'll never find me." It was a choice Marcus had faced before. In Afghanistan, there had been moments like this. Moments when you couldn't save everyone. Moments when you had to decide who lived and who died. He chose Henry. Leaving Eric, Marcus rushed to the bedroom. The fire was spreading faster now, licking at the doorframe. He wrapped Henry in his survival blanket and lifted the frail old man in his arms. "Ranger," he shouted. "Out now!" The dog didn't hesitate. He raced toward the front door, leading the way through the thickening smoke. Marcus followed, carrying Henry through the flames. The heat was intense, singeing his eyebrows, burning his lungs. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. They burst through the front door into the blessed cold of the Montana night. Marcus staggered several yards from the cabin before gently setting Henry down in the snow. The cabin was fully engulfed now. Flames shooting toward the dark sky, and Eric Crawford was nowhere to be seen, but Marcus could hear something in the distance. Helicopter rotors. Getting closer. His emergency beacon, the one he'd activated out of habit before leaving his cabin. Someone had received the signal. Help was coming. Marcus looked down at the man in his arms, his grandmother's lost love separated by war and circumstance for 50 years. Then he looked at Ranger, who had saved them both. "You found me," he said to the dog. "When I didn't want to be found. You found me anyway." Ranger pressed against his leg tail, wagging weakly. The helicopter appeared above the trees, searchlights cutting through the darkness. And somewhere in the forest, Eric Crawford was running. But he wouldn't get far. Marcus would make sure of that. Because this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The helicopter touched down on the hospital rooftop at exactly 11:47 p.m. Marcus held Henry's hand as the medical team rushed them through the emergency entrance. The old man had slipped in and out of consciousness during the flight, mumbling names and dates that meant nothing to the paramedics but everything to Marcus. Eleanor, 1968, Vietnam, the documents. "Sir, you need to let go now," a nurse said, trying to separate them. "We need to take him to the ICU." "I'm not leaving him," Marcus said. "Sir, please, you can't go past this point." Henry's eyes opened suddenly. His grip tightened on Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "Don't let them find you," Henry whispered. "Eric has people, money. He'll come for you next." "I can handle Eric." "No." Henry's voice cracked. "You don't understand. He killed before. Before me. His own father. My brother. Made it look like a heart attack. I didn't know until he told me. He told me while he was cutting off my finger. He enjoyed telling me." The words hit Marcus like a bullet to the chest. Your brother Eric killed his own father. But the medical team was already pulling Henry away, wheeling him through the double doors. The old man's hand slipped from Marcus's grip, and then he was gone. Marcus stood alone in the hospital corridor, Ranger pressed against his leg. Eric Crawford wasn't just a torturer. He was a murderer, and he was still out there somewhere in the Montana wilderness running from a crime scene, but not from his ambitions. $18 million. That's what Henry had said. 18 million reasons for Eric to keep coming. "Sir?" A young deputy approached, notepad in hand. "I'm Deputy Sarah Chen. Sheriff Taylor sent me to get your statement. Are you Marcus Cole?" Marcus nodded, still processing Henry's revelation. "The search teams found evidence of a second person fleeing the cabin fire." Deputy Chen continued. "Boot prints heading northeast. We've got people tracking them now, but the snow's making it difficult." "He's armed," Marcus said. "The gun he dropped in the cabin wasn't his only weapon. A man like that always has backup." "A man like what?" Marcus looked at the young deputy. She couldn't be more than 25. Fresh out of the academy, probably. No idea what kind of monster they were dealing with. "A man who tortured his own uncle for 3 months, who cut off an old man's finger for money, who shot a dog and left it to die." Marcus paused. "Who murdered his own father." Deputy Chen's pen stopped moving. "Murdered? We don't have any information about a murder." "Henry told me, right before they took him. Eric killed his father, made it look like natural causes." The deputy's face paled. "I need to call the sheriff." She stepped away, speaking rapidly into her radio. Marcus leaned against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up with him. He hadn't slept properly in months. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the past 12 hours was fading fast, but sleep would have to wait. His grandmother, Eleanor Porter, Henry's fiancée from 50 years ago. How was that possible? How had these two people separated by war and circumstance ended up living in the same remote Montana mountains without ever finding each other? Marcus pulled out his phone. Dead. He'd forgotten to charge it, just like the satellite messenger, just like everything else in his life that required maintenance and care. "Excuse me," he said to a passing nurse. "Is there a phone I can use?" She pointed to a waiting room down the hall. Marcus walked there slowly, Ranger padding beside him. The dog's wounds had reopened slightly during the chaos, blood seeping through the bandages, but he refused to leave Marcus's side. "You're one stubborn dog," Marcus said quietly. Ranger looked up at him with those amber eyes, and Marcus could have sworn the animal understood. He found a phone in the waiting room and dialed his sister's number. It rang 4 times before she answered. "Hello?" Lisa's voice was thick with sleep. "Who is this? It's me?" Silence. Then Marcus. "Oh my God, Marcus. I've been trying to reach you for 2 weeks. I thought you were dead. I thought you'd finally done something stupid." "I'm fine." "Fine? You disappear. Into the mountains. You don't answer your phone. You don't respond to any messages. And now you call me at midnight saying you're fine. Where the hell are you?" "Pine Ridge Memorial Hospital." "Hospital?" Lisa's voice sharpened. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "I'm not hurt. But I need to ask you something. It's about Grandma." "Grandma Marcus, she's been dead for 2 years. What could possibly her maiden name before she married into the family? What was it?" Lisa hesitated. "What's going on? Just tell me, please." "Porter. Her maiden name was Eleanor Porter." Marcus, why are you asking about this Eleanor Porter? The confirmation sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Henry hadn't been lying, hadn't been confused. Eleanor Porter had become Eleanor Cole when she married into the family, but before that she had been engaged to a soldier named Henry Crawford, a soldier who was reported killed in Vietnam, a soldier who had actually survived as a POW for 5 years, a soldier who came home to find his fiancée gone and spent the next 50 years searching for her. Marcus, Lisa's voice cut through his thoughts. Marcus, talk to me. What's happening? I found someone, Marcus said slowly. Someone who knew Grandma, someone she was engaged to before Vietnam. That's impossible. Grandma never mentioned anyone. She kept it secret. Lisa, this man has been searching for her for 50 years. They were living in the same mountains, just miles apart, and they never found each other. The line went silent. Then Lisa spoke, her voice quiet. She used to have nightmares. Do you remember when we were kids staying at her cabin? She'd wake up screaming a name. I always thought she was saying Henry. I thought it was her brother or something. Marcus closed his eyes. It was him. Henry Crawford. She never forgot him. But if he's alive, if he's been searching all this time, Marcus, does he know she's dead? Not yet. He's in critical condition. The doctors are trying to stabilize him. Critical condition? What happened to him? Marcus thought about the torture, the missing finger, the burns, the months of imprisonment. His nephew happened to him, Marcus said, and that nephew is still out there. The next 6 hours were a blur of police interviews and waiting. Sheriff Taylor arrived around 2 a.m., a weathered man in his 60s, with eyes that had seen too much. He listened to Marcus's account without interruption, occasionally making notes in a worn leather notebook. When Marcus finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair. Eric Crawford, he said. I know that name. His father died about 8 months ago. Heart attack, according to the official report. Henry says Eric killed him. Made it look natural. Sheriff Taylor's expression didn't change. Henry Crawford is 82 years old, severely traumatized and suffering from hypothermia and pneumonia. His testimony won't hold up in court without corroborating evidence. I saw what Eric did to him. The torture, the missing finger. That's not evidence. It's evidence of assault and kidnapping. Very serious charges. But murder, the sheriff shook his head. We'd need more. An exhumation, forensic analysis, a pattern? Then get it. It's not that simple, Mr. Cole. Eric Crawford comes from money. His father built a real estate empire in Billings. There are lawyers, political connections, people who owe the Crawford family favors. Marcus felt his hands tighten into fists. So he just gets away with it. I didn't say that. Sheriff Taylor leaned forward. I said it's not simple, but nothing worth doing ever is. At 4 a.m., Deputy Chen brought news. The tracking team lost Eric's trail at Miller's Creek, she reported. The snow covered his tracks, but we found something else. She held up an evidence bag containing a cell phone. He dropped it while running. Tech team is trying to crack it now. If we can access his messages, his contacts, his history... You'll have your evidence, Marcus finished. Maybe. These things take time. Time. The one thing Henry Crawford didn't have much of. Marcus went to the ICU at 6 a.m. Henry was awake, connected to monitors and IV lines, but his eyes were clear, clearer than they had been in the cabin. They told me I'll live, Henry said as Marcus entered. Not sure if that's good news or not. It's good news. Marcus pulled a chair beside the bed. Ranger immediately jumped up, resting his head on Henry's chest. The old man's weathered hand found the dog's fur. Good boy, you saved us both. He found me, Marcus said, in a blizzard with a bullet in his shoulder. He shouldn't have survived that journey, but he did. He's stubborn. Henry almost smiled. Like someone else I knew. Marcus took a deep breath. Tell me about her, about Eleanor. Henry's eyes drifted to something far away. We met in 1965. I was 22, just finished basic training. She was working at a diner in town. Most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. How long were you together? 3 years. The happiest 3 years of my life. Henry's voice softened. I asked her to marry me in the spring of '68. She said yes. We were going to have a June wedding. Small ceremony. Just family and close friends. What happened? Vietnam happened. I got my draft notice 2 weeks after the proposal. Shipped out in May. Never saw her again. Marcus felt the weight of those words. 50 years. Half a century of separation, of searching, of wondering. They told her you were dead. KIA. Killed in action. Henry's jaw tightened. My helicopter went down over Laos. We weren't supposed to be there. The government didn't acknowledge POWs in Laos because officially we weren't in Laos, so when my bird crashed, they just listed everyone as dead. But you survived. 4 of us survived the crash. 2 died in the camp within the first year. My friend Tom lasted 3 years. Henry paused. I was the only one who made it home. Sometimes I wonder why. When did you get back? 1975. After the fall of Saigon, the North Vietnamese released some of us as a gesture. Henry laughed bitterly. A gesture. That's what they called it. 5 years of hell and it was a gesture. And Eleanor was gone. Vanished. Her family had moved. No forwarding address. No one in town knew where she went. Henry looked at Marcus with those pale blue eyes. I spent the next 50 years looking for her, hired investigators, followed every lead. Nothing. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The battery was still dead, but he had grabbed a photo before leaving his grandmother's cabin. An old photograph, faded and worn. Is this her? He handed Henry the picture. The old man stared at it for a long moment. His hands began to tremble. Tears welled in his eye. Eleanor, he whispered. My Eleanor. She changed her name back to Porter after you were reported killed. Then she married my grandfather's brother, became Eleanor Cole. She thought I was dead. She thought you were dead, and she spent the rest of her life in these mountains, just like you. Henry pressed the photograph to his chest. How long? Marcus knew what he was asking. She died 2 years ago, peacefully, in her sleep. The sound that came from Henry Crawford was something between a sob and a scream. 50 years of searching, of hoping, of believing that maybe somewhere she was still waiting for him. And she had been, just 20 miles away. For nearly 2 decades, they had been neighbors, and they had never known. Ranger whimpered and pressed closer to Henry as if trying to absorb some of the old man's pain. She never remarried, Marcus said softly. After my great-uncle died, she lived alone in that cabin until the end. She never stopped grieving. For me? I didn't know it then, but yes, for you. Henry wept openly now, clutching the photograph like a lifeline. Marcus sat in silence, letting the man grieve. Some pain couldn't be comforted. It could only be witnessed. At 8 a.m., Sheriff Taylor arrived with news that changed everything. We cracked Eric's phone, he said, standing in the ICU doorway, and we found more than we expected. Marcus stood. What did you find, Deuce? Messages, hundreds of them, to and from someone Eric called the buyer. The sheriff's face was grim. Eric wasn't just after the mining claims for himself. He had already negotiated a sale. $18 million to a mining consortium based in Vancouver. So he was going to sell Henry's property. Not just sell it. The messages indicate Eric planned to forge Henry's signature on the transfer documents. He needed the original claim papers because the consortium's lawyers required them for authentication. Henry spoke up weakly from his bed. That's why he wanted the documents so badly. He couldn't complete the sale without them. There's more, Sheriff Taylor continued. The messages reference the old problem being resolved 8 months ago. We believe that's a reference to Eric's father. He confessed in writing. Marcus felt a spark of hope. Not explicitly, but combined with Henry's testimony and a possible exhumation, we might have enough for a murder charge. What about finding Eric? The sheriff's expression darkened. That's the bad news. Eric has money, resources. We've put out an APB, but if he's made it to Canada, he won't go to Canada, Henry said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. He won't run, Henry continued. Not yet. The sale. The consortium. He's been working on this for years. He's not going to give up $18 million just because things got complicated. What are you saying? Marcus asked. I'm saying Eric will try again. He knows I'm alive. He knows I'll testify against him. The only way he stays free and gets his money is if I'm dead and the documents are found. Timom? The implication hung in the air. He's going to come back, Marcus said. He's going to try to kill me, Henry agreed, and probably you too now that you're involved. Sheriff Taylor was already on his radio. I'm posting deputies outside this room. No one gets in without authorization. But Marcus was thinking about something else, something Henry had said earlier. The documents, he said slowly. Where are they? Henry's eyes met his. Eleanor had them. I gave her my copy before I shipped out. Told her to keep them safe until I came back. So they might still be at her cabin. At my grandmother's cabin. If she kept them, if she didn't destroy them, thinking I was dead. Marcus thought about his grandmother, about the woman who had lived alone for 20 years grieving a man she believed had died in Vietnam. Would she have destroyed his documents, or would she have kept them the way she kept everything else? "I need to go back to the cabin," Marcus said. "Are you insane?" Sheriff Taylor cut in. "Eric is out there somewhere. He could be watching the cabin right now." "Then he'll find me there instead of here. Draw him away from Henry." "That's suicide." "No," Marcus said quietly. "That's tactics. Eric wants the documents. He knows Henry won't tell him where they are. But if he sees me searching the cabin, he might think I found something. He might make a move." "And then what?" Marcus looked at the sheriff with the eyes of a man who had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan. "And then I deal with him." Henry grabbed Marcus's arm. "You don't have to do this. You barely know me. You don't owe me anything." "You're wrong." Marcus covered Henry's hand with his own. "You loved my grandmother. You spent 50 years searching for her. That makes you family." At 10 a.m., Marcus left the hospital. Deputy Chen drove him back to his cabin to get his truck. Ranger rode in the back seat alert despite his injuries. "The sheriff thinks you're crazy," Deputy Chen said. "The sheriff is probably right. Eric Crawford is dangerous. He's already proven he's willing to kill." "So am I," Marcus said. "The difference is I'm better at it." They arrived at Marcus's cabin at noon. Everything looked the same as when he'd left. Was it really just yesterday? It felt like a lifetime ago. "I'm supposed to stay with you," Deputy Chen said. "Sheriff's orders." "That's your call, but if Eric shows up, things are going to get ugly fast." The deputy's hand went to her service weapon. "I can handle ugly." Marcus almost smiled. "Okay then." He went inside to gather supplies. His rifle, extra ammunition, night vision goggles from his military days, a tactical vest, everything he might need if this turned into a fight. Because it would. Marcus was certain of that now. Eric Crawford had too much to lose. Too much invested. He wouldn't walk away. "What exactly are we looking for?" Deputy Chen asked. "Mining claim documents. My grandmother might have hidden them somewhere in the cabin, or maybe in the storage shed out back." "And you think Eric will come here looking for them?" "I think Eric will come here looking for me. The documents are just the excuse." They searched for 3 hours. Marcus went through every drawer, every closet, every hiding spot he could imagine. Deputy Chen took the shed, methodically examining boxes and containers. Nothing. "Maybe she did destroy them," Deputy Chen suggested. Marcus stood in the middle of his grandmother's living room, frustrated. He could feel the answer somewhere just out of reach. His grandmother had been careful, secretive. She wouldn't have destroyed something that important. Ranger scratched at the floor near the fireplace. "Not now, boy," Marcus said. But Ranger kept scratching, whining, pawing at a specific spot on the wooden planks. "What is it?" Deputy Chen asked. Marcus knelt beside the dog. The floorboard Ranger was scratching. It looked the same as all the others, but when Marcus pressed on it, he felt something different. A slight give, a hollow sound. "Help me move this," he said. Together they pried up the floorboard. Beneath it was a small metal box rusted with age but intact. Marcus's hands shook as he opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them tied with faded ribbon, a pressed flower, brown and brittle, an engagement ring in a velvet box, and underneath everything a folded document with an official seal, the mining claim. Dated 1968, 2 names listed as owners, Henry Crawford and Eleanor Porter. "You found it," Deputy Chen breathed. But Marcus was staring at something else. A letter separate from the others, unsealed, written in his grandmother's handwriting. He began to read. "My dearest Henry, if you are reading this, then somehow you survived. Somehow you came back. I always prayed you would even after they told me you were gone. I've kept everything, the ring, the documents, the letters you wrote me before that terrible day. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped waiting. And if this letter finds, you know that I spent my whole life wishing I could see your face again. All my love forever. Eleanor." The letter was dated 2019, 1 year before she died. She had known. Somehow, at the end, she had known there was a chance he was still alive. Marcus looked at Deputy Chen. "We need to get this to Henry." That's when Ranger started barking. Not the soft whines from before. This was urgent, aggressive, the bark of a dog who sensed danger. Deputy Chen drew her weapon. "Someone's outside." Marcus grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. In the fading afternoon light, he could see a figure at the edge of the tree line. Watching. Eric Crawford had found them. Call for backup, Bussell, Marcus said quietly. Already on it. Deputy Chen had her radio to her lips. Dispatch, this is Chen. We have a visual on the suspect at the Cole property. Request immediate backup. Static. Then copy that, Chen. Units en route. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. A lot could happen in 15 minutes. The figure at the tree line moved, disappeared into the forest. He's circling around, Marcus said, trying to find another approach. We should wait for backup. He won't wait. He knows we found something. He's going to make his move now. Marcus checked his rifle. 15 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, his pistol as backup, night vision ready. He had fought in Kandahar, in Fallujah, against enemies who wanted nothing more than to kill him. This was just one man, one very dangerous man. Stay here, Marcus told Deputy Chen. Watch the front. Where are you going? Marcus moved toward the back door. Hunting. The forest behind the cabin was dense shadows already gathering as the sun began its descent. Marcus moved through the trees like a ghost rifle raised every sense alert. Eric was out here, somewhere, watching, waiting. Marcus had hunted men before. In Afghanistan, they called it clearing operations. Moving through villages searching for insurgents, never knowing which doorway might hide a weapon. This was no different. A branch cracked to his left. Marcus spun rifle aimed. Nothing. He kept moving. Deeper into the trees, away from the cabin. Another sound. Behind him this time. Marcus dropped to one knee using a fallen log as cover. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. The training took over, pushing aside fear, pushing aside doubt. I know you're there, he called out. You should have run when you had the chance, Eric. A laugh echoed through the trees. Run? Why would I run? I've been planning this for years. One soldier with PTSD isn't going to stop me. Marcus tracked the voice. Northeast, maybe 30 yards. Your uncle told me about your father, about what you did to him. Silence. Then Eric's voice closer now. Uncle Henry talks too much, always has. That's going to change. The police have your phone. They found your messages. The deal with the consortium, the reference to the old problem. They know everything. They have suspicions. Without the documents, without Henry's testimony, they have nothing that will stick. Marcus adjusted his position, trying to triangulate. Henry is under police protection. You'll never get to him. Won't I? Eric laughed again. You'd be surprised what money can buy. Guards can be bribed. Accidents can happen. The only question is whether you'll be alive to see it. A gunshot exploded through the forest. Marcus felt the bullet pass inches from his head, slamming into the tree behind him. He rolled, came up firing 3 quick shots toward the muzzle flash. Return fire! Eric was moving, circling, trying to flank him. This wasn't an amateur. Eric had trained for this. Prepared for this. Another shot. This one hit the log Marcus was using for cover, spraying splinters. Marcus returned fire and moved, keeping low, putting trees between himself and the shooter. You served, didn't you? Marcus called out. 3 years, Army Reserve, before I figured out that money was more important than patriotism. Then you know how this ends. I've got more training, more experience, more reason to fight. Maybe, Eric's voice was moving again, but I've got more to lose. That makes me dangerous. Ranger's bark cut through the tension. The dog had followed Marcus into the forest despite being told to stay. Ranger no, huh? Marcus shouted, but the dog was already charging toward Eric's position, teeth bared. A gunshot. Ranger yelped. Something inside Marcus snapped. He moved without thinking, without planning, pure instinct and rage driving him forward. Through the trees toward the sound rifle raised. Eric was there, turning toward him, gun coming up. Marcus fired first. The bullet caught Eric in the shoulder, spinning him around. His weapon fell from his grip, but Eric wasn't finished. He pulled a knife from his belt, lunging at Marcus with desperate fury. They collided, crashing to the forest floor. The rifle was useless at this range. Marcus blocked the knife strike, felt the blade slice across his forearm. Pain, blood, adrenaline. He drove his elbow into Eric's wounded shoulder. The man screamed and dropped the knife. Marcus followed with a punch to the jaw, then another. Eric went limp. Marcus stood over him, breathing hard blood dripping from his arm. The man who had tortured an old man for 3 months. Who had murdered his own father. Who had shot an innocent dog. It would be so easy to finish it. So easy to make sure Eric Crawford never hurt anyone again. Marcus picked up his rifle, aimed it at Eric's head. His finger touched the trigger. Don't. Deputy Chen's voice. She had followed him into the forest, weapon drawn. "He deserves it," Marcus said. "Maybe, but you don't deserve to become a killer because of him." Marcus looked at the woman, then at Eric, then at Ranger limping toward him with blood on his fur but still alive. He lowered the rifle. "Call it in," he said. "Tell them we have the suspect in custody." 20 minutes later, the forest was filled with deputies and paramedics. Eric Crawford was handcuffed and loaded into a patrol car, his shoulder wound treated just enough to keep him alive. Marcus sat on the cabin steps, letting a paramedic bandage his arm. Ranger lay beside him, his own wounds being tended by another medic. "The dog took a graze," the medic said. "Looks worse than it is. He'll be fine." Marcus ran his hand over Ranger's head. "You're one tough dog. You know that." Ranger's tail wagged weakly. Sheriff Taylor approached, notepad in hand. "That was either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," Marcus admitted. "Eric's asking for a lawyer. Won't say anything else." "He doesn't need to. You have his phone. You have Henry's testimony. You have the documents." The sheriff nodded slowly. "We have enough. For the kidnapping, the assault, the attempted murder today. The murder of his father will take longer, but we'll get there." Marcus looked at the forest, at the fading light, at the world that had changed so completely in the past 24 hours. "I need to see Henry," he said. "I need to show him what we found." At 9 p.m., Marcus walked back into Henry's hospital room. The old man was awake, watching the door as if he'd been waiting. "They told me," Henry said. "They told me you caught him." "He won't hurt anyone else." Marcus sat in the chair beside the bed. Ranger jumped up immediately, resuming his position at Henry's side. "And the documents," Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded paper. The mining claim from 1968. Henry's name, Eleanor's name, together. "She kept it," Henry whispered, "all these years. She kept everything." Marcus handed him the letter. The letter Eleanor had written, hoping against hope that Henry might someday read it. Henry unfolded the paper. His eyes moved across the words, and then he began to cry. Not the harsh, broken sobs from before. These were different, softer, the tears of a man finally finding peace. "She knew," he said. "At the end, she knew I might still be alive. I think she always knew, somewhere deep down." Henry held the letter to his chest. 50 years. 50 years I searched for her, and she was right here, waiting. Marcus thought about fate, about coincidence, about a wounded dog dragging himself through a blizzard to scratch at a stranger's door. Maybe some stories were meant to be finished, even if it took 50 years. "What happens now?" Henry asked. "Now you rest. Now you heal, and then what?" Marcus looked at the old man, at the dog, at the letter clutched in Henry's weathered hands. "Then you come home," he said. "My grandmother's cabin, Eleanor's cabin. That's where you belong." Henry's eyes widened. "You would do that for me." Family takes care of family. Outside the hospital window, the Montana night stretched toward the mountains. Somewhere in those peaks, gold waited to be discovered. A fortune worth millions. But in this room, watching an old soldier finally find peace, Marcus understood something his grandmother had known all along. Some treasures can't be measured in money. Some things are worth more than gold. 3 days passed before the doctors cleared Henry for discharge. Marcus spent those 3 days at the hospital, leaving only to shower and change clothes at his cabin. He told himself it was because Henry needed protection, because Eric might have accomplices, because the old man shouldn't be alone. But the truth was simpler. Marcus didn't want to be alone either. On the morning of the 4th day, a nurse wheeled Henry to the hospital entrance where Marcus waited with his truck. Ranger sat in the back seat, tail wagging, fully recovered from his wounds. "Ready?" Marcus asked. Henry looked at the mountains in the distance. The same mountains where Eleanor had lived, where she had died, where she had waited for him without knowing he was so close. "I've been ready for 50 years, he said. The drive to the cabin took 40 minutes. Neither man spoke much. There wasn't a need for words. The silence between them had become comfortable the way it does between soldiers who have faced something together. When they pulled up to the cabin, Henry sat motionless in the passenger seat. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where she lived. For almost 20 years. 20 years, Henry's voice cracked. "I was 30 miles away. 30 miles. I could have walked here in a day." Marcus put his hand on Henry's shoulder. "You didn't know. I should have looked harder. I should have tried more. You tried for 50 years. That's more than most people give in a lifetime." Henry finally opened the door and stepped out. His legs were still weak, his body still recovering, but he refused Marcus's offer of help. This was something he needed to do himself. He walked to the cabin door and stopped. "I can smell her," he said softly. "After all these years, I can still smell her perfume." Marcus didn't say that was impossible. Didn't point out that Eleanor had been gone for 2 years, that any trace of her scent would have faded long ago, because maybe it wasn't impossible. Maybe some things lasted longer than logic could explain. Henry pushed open the door and stepped inside. Ranger followed him, padding softly across the wooden floor. The dog seemed to understand the significance of the moment, staying close to Henry but giving him space. Marcus watched from the doorway as Henry moved through the cabin. The old man touched everything. The kitchen counter where Eleanor had prepared meals. The armchair by the fireplace where she had read her books. The window where she had watched the sunset over the mountains. "She was happy here," Henry said finally. "Wasn't she?" "I think so. My sister and I used to visit when we were kids. She always seemed at peace." "But lonely." Marcus couldn't deny it. "Yes, lonely too." Henry turned to face him. "Thank you for bringing me here, for everything." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." Henry's eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "You saved my life. You gave me closure. You gave me a home." The word hung in the air. Home. Such a simple word for something so profound. "There's something else you should see," Marcus said. He led Henry to the hidden compartment under the floorboards. The metal box was still there along with its contents. The letters, the photographs, the engagement ring. Henry knelt slowly, his old big joints protesting, and lifted the ring from its velvet box. "I gave this to her in the spring of '68, he said. "Saved up for 6 months? It wasn't much, but it was everything I had." "She kept it for 50 years. Henry slipped the ring onto his pinky finger. It barely fit past the first knuckle, but he wore it anyway. "Now I'll keep it for whatever time I have left." That evening, Marcus made dinner, while Henry rested in the armchair by the fire. Ranger lay between them, head on his paws, content. "Tell me about her," Henry said. "Tell me what she was like when she got older." Marcus thought about his grandmother, the woman who had taught him to fish, who had told him stories about the mountains, who had never once mentioned a soldier named Henry Crawford. "She was strong," he said, "independent, stubborn as hell." Henry laughed softly. "That sounds like her." "She didn't talk much about the past. I always thought it was just her way. Private. Keeps things inside." "She was like that when I knew her too, but when she opened up..." Henry's voice trailed off. "When she let you in, it was like seeing the sun after a long winter." Marcus set 2 plates on the small kitchen table. "Did you ever think about giving up on finding her every day?" Henry accepted the plate with a grateful nod. "Every single day I thought about stopping, about accepting that she was gone, but then I'd wake up the next morning and I'd think, what if today is the day? What if she's just around the corner? 50 years of what ifs. 50 years of hope. That's the thing about hope, Marcus. It's the last thing to die, even when everything else is gone." They ate in silence for a while. Outside, the wind picked up whistling through the trees. Ranger's ears twitched at the sound, but he didn't move from his spot by the fire. "Can I ask you something?" Henry said. "Anything." "The nightmares. Do they ever stop?" Marcus set down his fork. "Please." "You know about the nightmares. I've heard you, the past 2 nights at the hospital, talking in your sleep, calling out names." Marcus felt exposed. Vulnerable. It wasn't a feeling he was comfortable with. "No," he said finally. "They don't stop. They just change. Sometimes they're less intense. Sometimes they're worse. But they're always there." Vietnam was the same. For me, I'll get 40 years of waking up in that camp, 40 years of hearing the guards' boots on the floor. "How did you survive it?" Henry looked at him with those pale blue eyes. "I didn't, not really. The man who went to Vietnam died there. What came back was something different, something harder. But eventually I learned to live with that harder version of myself. And now I'm learning again. At 82 years old, I'm learning how to be something new." Marcus understood. The explosion that killed his squad had changed him too. The man who walked into that convoy wasn't the man who walked out. But maybe that was okay. Maybe change wasn't the same as destruction. At 9 p.m., Sheriff Taylor called. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. Marcus stepped outside so Henry wouldn't hear. What kind of problem? Eric Crawford made bail. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. That's impossible. He's facing kidnapping, assault, attempted murder. His lawyers argued flight risk was minimal since all his assets are frozen. Judge Harriman agreed. Set bail at $2 million. Eric's business partners put up the money. Business partners? The consortium, the people who are going to buy the mining claims. Apparently, they're very motivated to keep Eric out of prison. Marcus gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles went white. Where is he now? That's the other problem. He was supposed to check in with his parole officer this morning. He didn't show. He's running. Or he's planning something. I've got deputies watching the cabin, but you need to be careful. This guy has resources, connections, and he's got nothing to lose now. Marcus looked back at the cabin window. Henry was visible in the firelight reading one of Eleanor's old books. Ranger lay at his feet, peaceful and trusting. He comes near this cabin, he's not walking away again. Marcus, I can't officially endorse. I didn't ask for endorsement. I'm telling you what's going to happen. The sheriff was quiet for a moment. I'll have Deputy Chen run extra patrols, and Marcus watch your back. The call ended. Marcus stood in the cold darkness thinking about Eric Crawford. About money. About desperation. $2 million in bail. The consortium must want those mining claims badly to risk that kind of investment. But why? What made them so valuable? He pulled out his phone and searched for information on mining claims in the Bitterroot Mountains. What he found made his blood run cold. New geological surveys. Advanced extraction techniques. The gold deposits in these mountains weren't just valuable. They were some of the richest untapped reserves in North America. 18 million was a conservative estimate. The real value could be 10 times that. 100 times. And half of it legally belonged to Henry Crawford. Marcus went back inside. Henry had fallen asleep in the armchair, the book open on his chest. Ranger looked up at Marcus with those knowing amber eyes. We've got trouble, boy, Marcus whispered. Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor as if to say, when don't we, the next morning brought an unexpected visitor. At 8 a.m., a black SUV pulled up to the cabin. Marcus watched from the window rifle within reach as a woman in an expensive suit stepped out. She was in her 50s, silver hair, cut short, eyes that missed nothing. She carried a leather briefcase and walked with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. Marcus met her on the porch. Can I help you? Mr. Cole? She extended a manicured hand. My name is Victoria Chen. I'm an attorney representing Pacific Northwest Mining Consortium. The consortium that bailed out Eric Crawford. Victoria's smile didn't waver. We're aware of Mr. Crawford's legal troubles. However, our interest is in the mining claims, not in Mr. Crawford personally. Then you've wasted a trip. Those claims aren't for sale. Everything is for sale, Mercole. It's simply a matter of finding the right price. Marcus crossed his arms. The claims belong to Henry Crawford. Half of them anyway. The other half belong to my grandmother. So unless you're planning to make an offer that includes Henry's consent, we have nothing to talk about. Victoria reached into her briefcase and pulled out a document. Actually, that's precisely what I want to discuss. We're prepared to offer $40 million for the combined claims. $20 million to Mr. Crawford. $20 million to you as Eleanor Porter's heir. $40 million. The number hung in the air like a challenge. That's more than double what Eric was going to get, Marcus said. Eric was impatient. He underestimated the value of the deposits. We did not. And you think money is going to make us forget what your client did to Henry? Victoria's smile finally faded. Mr. Cole, let me be clear. Eric Crawford is not our client. He was a means to an end that proved unsuitable. We have no loyalty to him. What we have is an interest in those mining claims. An interest we're willing to pursue through legal channels. Legal channels didn't stop you from bailing out a kidnapper. A calculated investment. One that may or may not pay off, depending on how reasonable everyone involved chooses to be. Before Marcus could respond, the cabin door opened. Henry stood in the doorway, Ranger at his side. I heard voices, Henry said. What's going on? Victoria turned her attention to the old man. Mr. Crawford, I'm Victoria Chen. I was just explaining to your friend that my clients wish to purchase your mining claims. Henry looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Marcus. How much? Mark, $40 million. Split evenly between you and Mr. Cole. $40 million. Henry repeated the number slowly. That's a lot of money. It is. More than enough for a comfortable retirement, medical care, security. Security. Henry laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your company bailed out the man who tortured me, who cut off my finger, who shot my dog, and you're offering me security. Mr. Crawford, I understand you've been through a terrible ordeal, but business is business. The consortium had no knowledge of Eric's methods. We simply wanted the claims. Get off my property, Victoria blinked. Excuse me? I said get off my property. Henry's voice was ice. Eleanor and I bought those claims 50 years ago. We were going to build a life on them, a family, a future. She kept them safe all this time, waiting for me, waiting for a day that never came. Mr. Crawford, please be reasonable. Those claims are all I have left of her, the only proof that we existed, that we loved each other, and you think I'm going to sell that for money? Victoria's composure cracked slightly. Everyone has a price. Not me. Henry stepped forward, and despite his age, despite his frailty, there was something dangerous in his eyes. Not for this. Now leave, before I forget that I'm too old to fight. Victoria looked at Marcus, searching for an ally. She found none. This isn't over, she said, retreating toward her SUV. My clients don't accept no for an answer. Then they're going to be disappointed. The SUV disappeared down the mountain road. Marcus and Henry stood on the porch watching it go. $40 million, Marcus said. That's a lot to turn down. Henry shook his head. Money can't buy back the years I lost. Can't bring Eleanor back. Can't erase what Eric did to me. He looked at Marcus. Some things matter more than money. I thought you understood that. I do. I just wanted to make sure you were certain. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. At noon, Deputy Chen arrived with news. We found Eric's car, she said. Abandoned at a trailhead about 15 miles north. He's on foot somewhere in the mountains. Marcus studied the map she'd brought. The trailhead was remote, but it connected to a network of paths that crisscrossed the wilderness. A man who knew these mountains could hide for weeks. He's not running, Marcus said. He's positioning. Positioning for what? For another try. The consortium visited this morning. They offered $40 million for the claims. Henry turned them down. Deputy Chen whistled softly. $40 million, and he said no. He said no. Eric must be desperate. If the consortium is offering that much and Henry won't sell, then Eric's only play is to get the claims another way. They both understood what that meant. If Henry died without selling the claims, they would pass to his next of kin. Eric was that next of kin. He might be facing criminal charges, but inheritance wasn't contingent on being a good person. We need to find him before he finds us, Marcus said. The sheriff has every available deputy searching, but these mountains? Deputy Chen shook her head. There are thousands of places to hide. Marcus looked at Ranger. The dog had tracked him through a blizzard with a bullet in his shoulder. He'd found the hidden compartment under the floorboards when no one else could. Maybe we don't need every available deputy, Marcus said. Maybe we just need the right tracker. At 2 p.m., Marcus and Ranger left the cabin. Deputy Chen stayed with Henry along with 2 other officers the sheriff had assigned. Marcus didn't like leaving the old man, but he liked the idea of Eric out there planning even less. Ranger led the way, nose to the ground, following a scent Marcus couldn't detect. They moved through the forest like ghosts, the dog's pace steady and confident. You remember his smell, don't you? Marcus said quietly. The man who shot you. The man who hurt Henry. Ranger's hackles rose slightly at the words, but he didn't break stride. They walked for 2 hours deeper into the wilderness than Marcus had ever ventured. The afternoon sun began to sink toward the peaks, casting long shadows through the trees. Then Ranger stopped. The dog's body went rigid, ears forward, eyes fixed on something in the distance. Marcus dropped to one knee, rifle raised. He scanned the forest ahead, looking for movement, for any sign of human presence. Nothing. But Ranger didn't move. Didn't relax. Whatever he sensed was still there. Show me, Marcus whispered. Ranger crept forward, belly low to the ground. Marcus followed every sense alert. They found the campsite in a small clearing. A tent, a fire pit with cold ashes, supplies scattered across the ground. But no Eric. Marcus examined the site carefully. Food wrappers, empty water bottles, a sleeping bag still warm to the touch. He'd been here recently. Very recently. Something glinted in the underbrush nearby. Marcus approached cautiously and found a cell phone partially hidden beneath leaves. Not just any phone. Eric's phone, the one Sheriff Taylor said he'd been using to communicate. Why would Eric leave his phone behind unless he wanted it to be found? The realization hit Marcus like a thunderbolt. This wasn't Eric's real camp. This was a decoy, a trap. Ranger back, Marcus commanded, but Ranger wasn't looking at him. The dog was looking past him toward the trail they'd just walked, toward the cabin. Toward Henry. Marcus ran. He ran faster than he'd run since Afghanistan, ignoring the pain in his back where the shrapnel pressed against his spine. Ranger kept pace beside him, understanding the urgency without being told. 15 minutes. That's how long they'd spent at the fake campsite. 15 minutes that Eric had used to circle around them to head straight for the cabin while Marcus was distracted. The trap wasn't here in the forest. The trap was back at the cabin. Marcus grabbed his radio. Chen, do you copy? Static. Deputy Chen, this is Marcus Cole. Please respond. More static. The radio had been working fine an hour ago. Now it was dead. Jammed. Someone was jamming the frequency. Marcus pushed harder. Lungs burning, legs screaming. Ranger pulled ahead, his 4 legs covering ground faster than Marcus's 2. Go it! Marcus shouted. Go to Henry! Ranger disappeared into the trees, a blur of fur and determination. Marcus followed, praying he wasn't too late. He burst out of the forest to see the cabin in chaos. Deputy Chen lay on the ground near her patrol car, motionless. The 2 other officers were nowhere to be seen. And standing on the porch, one arm wrapped around Henry's throat, the other holding a gun to his head, was Eric Crawford. Stop right there, Eric called out. Drop the rifle. Marcus froze. His mind raced through scenarios, angles, possibilities. But Eric had chosen his position carefully. There was no clean shot, no safe approach. I said drop it. Marcus lowered his rifle slowly. Let him go, Eric. It's over. Over. Eric laughed. It's just getting started. I've spent 3 years planning this. 3 years of dealing with my father's estate, discovering the claims, calculating the value. I'm not walking away now. You're going to prison. Even if you kill Henry, you'll never get the claims. Won't I? Eric pressed the gun harder against Henry's temple. Without Henry's testimony, the assault charges become much harder to prove. Without him alive, the claims pass to me as next of kin. And without you? He turned the gun toward Marcus. Without you, there's no one left who knows what really happened. The sheriff knows, the deputies know, there's evidence. Evidence can disappear. Witnesses can have accidents. Money can buy a lot of solutions. Marcus's eyes flicked to the tree line. Where was Ranger? You're insane, Henry said. His voice was calm despite the gun at his head. You killed your own father. You tortured me for months. And you think you're going to get away with this. I got away with it before. Dad's death was ruled natural causes, remember. The sheriff is reopening that investigation. They're going to exhume the body. Eric's grip tightened. Then I guess I need to move faster than I planned. The gunshot came from nowhere. Marcus didn't fire. Eric didn't fire. The shot came from behind Eric from inside the cabin. Eric staggered forward, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder. His grip on Henry loosened. In that moment, Ranger struck. The dog launched himself at Eric from the side teeth, finding the arm that held the gun. Eric screamed and dropped the weapon. Marcus charged forward, tackling Eric to the ground. They struggled briefly, but Eric was wounded, weakened. Within seconds, Marcus had him pinned, arms wrenched behind his back. It's over, Marcus said. It's finally over. He looked up at the cabin door. Deputy Chen stood there, leaning against the frame for support, her service weapon still smoking. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were clear. He got the drop on us, she said. Hit me with something when I turned my back, but I woke up when I heard him dragging Mr. Crawford out. You saved our lives. Just doing my job. She managed a weak smile. Though I wouldn't say no to a raise. Sheriff Taylor arrived 20 minutes later with a fleet of deputies. Eric was handcuffed and loaded into an ambulance under armed guard. This time, the bullet had passed through his shoulder cleanly. He would live to stand trial. No bail this time, the sheriff promised Marcus. Not after this. He's going away for a long, long time. Marcus sat on the cabin steps, Ranger beside him. Henry sat in the armchair by the fireplace, a blanket around his shoulders, the engagement ring still on his finger. It's really over now, Henry said. Isn't it? Marcus looked at the old man, at the cabin, at the mountains that had held so many secrets for so long. The danger is over, he said. But I think the story is just beginning. Henry smiled, a real smile, the first one Marcus had seen from him. Then maybe it's time to start a new chapter. Retry 2 weeks had passed since Eric Crawford's arrest, and the cabin felt different now. Marcus noticed it in small ways. The silence that had once felt oppressive now felt peaceful. The isolation that had driven him to the edge of despair now felt like protection. The walls that had witnessed his darkest moments now held something else entirely. hope. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, Marcus found Henry already awake sitting in Eleanor's armchair, with her journal open on his lap. The old man had taken to reading it every morning, discovering pieces of the woman he'd loved through words she'd written decades after their separation. "She wrote about you, huh?" Henry said without looking up. March 15th, 1985. She wrote, "I dreamed of Henry again last night. We were dancing at the county fair the way we used to. When I woke up, I could still feel his arms around me." Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to Henry. "She never talked about you, not once in all the years I knew her." Some pain runs too deep for words. Henry accepted the cup with a grateful nod. "She buried it so she could survive. I understand that now." Ranger patted over and rested his head on Henry's knee. The dog had become inseparable from the old man, as if making up for the months they'd been apart. "The district attorney called yesterday," Marcus said. "Eric's trial is set for next month. They want you to testify." Henry's hand trembled slightly, coffee sloshing in the cup. "I figured they would." "You don't have to. With all the evidence they have, your testimony might not be necessary." "No." Henry set down the cup and looked at Marcus with determination. "I need to do this. For myself. For Eleanor. For everyone Eric has hurt. It won't be easy. His lawyers are going to try to discredit you. They'll bring up your age, your time in captivity, anything they can use." "Let them try." Henry's jaw set in a familiar expression. Marcus had seen that same look on his grandmother's face when she'd made up her mind about something. "I've survived Vietnamese prison camps. I've survived 3 months of torture at my own nephew's hands. I can survive a courtroom." At 9 a.m., Sheriff Taylor arrived with news. "The exhumation results came back," he said, standing on the cabin porch with a folder in his hands. "Eric's father, your brother." Henry had come to the door despite Marcus's protests that he should rest. "What did they find?" The sheriff opened the folder. "Potassium chloride, high concentrations in the tissue samples. It causes cardiac arrest and is nearly undetectable in a standard autopsy." "He poisoned him," Marcus said. "Injected him, most likely. We found a small puncture mark on the body that was missed during the original examination. Combined with Eric's messages about the old problem and your testimony, Mr. Crawford, we have enough for a murder charge." Henry leaned against the doorframe, his face pale. "My own nephew killed my brother, his own father." "I'm sorry," Sheriff Taylor said. "I know this doesn't make it easier." "Oh, easier?" Henry laughed bitterly. "There's no easier for something like this. Richard and I had our differences, but he was still my brother. He didn't deserve to die like that." Marcus put a hand on Henry's shoulder. "Come inside. You need to sit down. I need answers." Henry shook off the hand. "Sheriff, why would Eric kill his own father?" "Money. Same reason he kidnapped you." Richard Crawford had begun asking questions about the estate, about the mining claims. He'd hired an investigator to look into the property history. He was getting too close to the truth, Marcus realized. "That's our theory. Eric couldn't risk his father discovering the value of the claims and potentially reaching out to you, Mr. Crawford, so he eliminated the threat." Henry's legs gave out. Marcus caught him before he fell, guiding him to the armchair inside. Ranger immediately pressed against the old man, offering what comfort he could. 3 years, Henry whispered. "Eric has been planning this for 3 years. He killed his father. He kidnapped me. He would have killed all of us." "But he didn't," Marcus said firmly. "We stopped him, and now he's going to pay for everything he's done." At noon, Lisa Cole arrived. Marcus had called his sister 2 days after Eric's final arrest, telling her everything. About Henry, about Eleanor, about the mining claims and the 50 years of separation. Lisa had listened in stunned silence, then asked one question: "When can I come?" Now she stood on the cabin porch, her eyes red from crying, clutching a box of old photographs she'd found in her own storage. "Marcus." She hugged him tightly. "I can't believe any of this is real." "Neither can I, most days." Lisa pulled back and looked at the cabin. This is where she lived all those years. "Come inside. There's someone you need to meet." Henry rose from his chair as Lisa entered. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The man who had loved Eleanor Porter. The granddaughter who had known Eleanor Cole. "You have her eyes?" Henry said softly. "Both of you do." Lisa's composure crumbled. "Mr. Crawford, I don't know what to say. I never knew about you. She never told us." "Henry, please call me Henry." He gestured to the chair opposite his own. "And there's nothing to say. Your grandmother did what she had to do to survive. I don't blame her for that." They talked for hours. Lisa shared stories about Eleanor that Marcus had never heard. Summer vacations at the cabin when the children were young, holiday dinners where Eleanor would make her famous apple pie, the way she'd sit on the porch at sunset watching the mountains with a faraway look in her eyes. I always thought she was just enjoying the view, Lisa said. Now I understand. She was looking for something, someone. Or waiting, Henry added. Waiting for someone to come home. Marcus excused himself and stepped outside. The weight of the conversation of the revelations of everything that had happened in the past 3 weeks pressed down on him like a physical force. Ranger followed him, settling at his feet as Marcus sat on the porch steps. You started all of this, Marcus said to the dog. That night in the blizzard, if you hadn't found me. Ranger looked up at him with those amber eyes, and Marcus could have sworn the animal understood. Henry would be dead. The truth would have died with him. Eleanor's story would have ended without anyone knowing. The dog's tail wagged once. But you did find me, against impossible odds, through a blizzard with a bullet in your shoulder. Marcus shook his head. Maybe there really is such a thing as fate. At 3 p.m., the conversation inside took an unexpected turn. There's something I need to tell you both, Henry said. His voice had grown serious, his expression troubled. Marcus had returned inside when Lisa called him. Now they sat together waiting. The mining claims, Henry continued, they're worth a fortune, more than I ever imagined when Eleanor and I bought them 50 years ago. The consortium offered $40 million, Marcus confirmed. That's just the beginning. I did some research, made some calls. The actual value could be 10 times that, maybe more, if the extraction is done properly. Lisa's eyes widened. $400 million. Potentially, the gold deposits in these mountains are extensive. Modern technology can reach veins that were inaccessible decades ago. What are you saying? Marcus asked. Henry leaned forward. I'm saying that we need to make a decision. All of us. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about legacy, about what Eleanor would have wanted. She kept those claims safe for 50 years, Lisa said. She must have had a reason. She was keeping them for me. Henry's voice cracked. She believed I was dead, but she couldn't let go of our dreams. The house we were going to build. The family we were going to raise. Marcus felt the weight of the moment. What do you want to do, Henry? The old man was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady. I want to honor her. I want to take something that was born from our love and turn it into something that helps others. Veterans who came home broken like me. Animals who need rescue like Ranger. Families who lost someone to war and never got answers. A foundation, Lisa whispered. The Eleanor Porter Crawford Foundation. Henry smiled for the first time in hours. Half the proceeds from the mining operation. The other half split between you two as her heirs. Marcus shook his head. I don't need the money. Neither do I, Lisa agreed. Then donate your shares too. Or set up trusts for your children, your grandchildren. But the foundation comes first. That's my condition. That's Eleanor's legacy. The siblings exchanged looks. Something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. Agreed, Marcus said. Agreed, Lisa echoed. At 6 p.m. they received a visitor none of them expected. The knock on the door was hesitant, uncertain. Marcus opened it to find a young woman in her 20s, dark hair pulled back, eyes red from crying. Mr. Cole, her voice shook. I'm sorry to come unannounced. My name is Rachel Crawford. Eric is my father. The name hit like a thunderbolt. Eric's daughter. Marcus hadn't even known he had one. What do you want? His voice was harder than he intended. To apologize. Rachel's tears spilled over. For everything. For what he did to Great Uncle Henry. For all of it. Henry appeared in the doorway behind Marcus. Let her in? Henry? She's not her father. Henry's voice was gentle but firm. Let her in. Rachel entered the cabin like she was walking into a lion's den. Her eyes took in the photographs on the walls, the journal on the side table, the old man who should have been her family but had instead been her father's victim. I didn't know, she said, her voice breaking. I swear I didn't know what he was doing. He told me Great Uncle Henry had died years ago. He told me Grandpa Richard's death was natural. I believed him. When did you find out the truth? Marcus asked. When I saw the news reports. When I read what he'd done. Rachel wrapped her arms around herself. My mother divorced him 5 years ago. She always said there was something wrong with him, something dark underneath the charm. I didn't want to believe her. Henry approached the young woman slowly. How old are you, Rachel? 23. 23. Henry sighed. You weren't even born when I came back from Vietnam. You had no part in any of this. But I'm still his daughter. I'm still a Crawford. That name doesn't define you. Your choices do. Diddy. Henry reached out and took her trembling hands. You came here to apologize for something you didn't do. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Rachel broke down, completely sobbing into Henry's shoulder as the old man held her. Marcus watched, uncertain how to feel. Part of him wanted to throw her out, to blame her for carrying the blood of the man who had caused so much suffering. But another part understood. Children weren't responsible for their parents' sins. Rachel Crawford was as much a victim of Eric's deception as anyone else. At 8 p.m. after Rachel had left with promises to stay in touch, Marcus found Henry staring at a photograph of Eleanor. You surprised me today, Marcus said, with Rachel. She reminded me of someone. Henry traced Eleanor's face with his finger. When I came back from Vietnam, I was filled with rage. Rage at the enemy who'd captured me. Rage at the government that abandoned me. Rage at a world that had moved on without me. What changed? Eleanor. The memory of her. I realized that if I let the rage consume me, I'd lose the only thing that had kept me alive in those camps. The belief that love was stronger than hate. Marcus sat down beside him. Do you still believe that... I do. Eric was consumed by greed, by entitlement, by the belief that he deserved more than others. That's a kind of hate, Marcus. Hate for anyone who stands in your way. And you forgave him. No? Henry's voice hardened. I'll never forgive him for what he did. But I won't let him turn me into something I'm not. I won't let his darkness extinguish my light. At 10 p.m., Marcus was alone on the porch when Sheriff Taylor called. We have a situation, the sheriff said without preamble. What kind of situation? Eric Crawford attempted suicide in his cell tonight. The words hung in the air. Marcus felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, not even surprise. Is he dead? No, the guards found him in time. He's in the hospital under suicide watch. Why are you telling me this? Because he's asking to see Henry. Says he wants to apologize before the trial. Says he needs to make peace with what he's done. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's not happening. I know, but I thought Henry should know. This might come up in court, the defense trying to show remorse rehabilitation. Eric Crawford doesn't feel remorse. He feels trapped. There's a difference. I agree, but the decision is Henry's to make. Marcus found Henry still awake, still holding Eleanor's photograph. The sheriff called, Marcus said. Eric tried to kill himself. Henry's expression didn't change. Did he succeed? No, he's in the hospital. He wants to see you, claims he wants to apologize. Do you believe him? No. Henry set down the photograph and looked at Marcus with those pale blue eyes. Neither do I. Eric never apologized for anything in his life. He's manipulating even now. You don't have to see him. I know. Henry was quiet for a moment. But maybe I should. What? Not for him, for me. Henry stood slowly, his old bones protesting. There are things I need to say, things I need to get out of my head before they eat me alive. Henry, this is dangerous, emotionally dangerous. You've been through enough. I've been through hell, Marcus. What's one more devil? The next morning they drove to the hospital. Sheriff Taylor had arranged the visit personally, ensuring maximum security. Marcus refused to let Henry go alone, and the old man didn't argue. Eric Crawford lay in a hospital bed, wrists bandaged, face pale. He looked smaller than Marcus remembered, diminished, like a snake without its fangs. Uncle Henry? Eric's voice was a rasp. You came. Not for you. Henry stood at the foot of the bed, Ranger at his side. I came for myself. I'm sorry for everything. I don't know what came over me. The money, the pressure, it changed me into someone I don't recognize. That's a lie. Henry's voice was ice. You recognized exactly who you were. You just didn't care. Eric's mask of contrition slipped slightly. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You killed your father because he was inconvenient. You kidnapped me because I had something you wanted. You tortured me for months because you enjoyed the power. That's not... Don't interrupt me. Henry stepped closer, and despite his age, despite his frailty, there was something terrifying in his eyes. You want to know what kept me alive in that cabin, in that prison you created, the same thing that kept me alive in Vietnam, hope. Eric said nothing. Hope that someone would find me. Hope that justice would prevail. Hope that evil doesn't win, not in the end. Henry leaned closer. You tried to take everything from me. My freedom, my dignity, my dog, but you couldn't take my hope. And that's why I'm standing here and you're lying in that bed. Uncle Henry, please? I have one thing to say to you, Eric. One thing, and then I'm leaving, and I will never see you again. Eric waited, something flickering in his eye. Fear, curiosity, Marcus couldn't tell. I forgive you. The words shocked everyone, including Marcus. What? Eric's voice cracked. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, not because what you did can ever be made right, but because carrying hate is too heavy a burden for an old man like me. Henry straightened. I forgive you so I can let go, so I can live whatever time I have left in peace, so you can rot in prison knowing that you failed. You didn't break me. You didn't win. Henry turned and walked out of the room without looking back. In the hallway, his composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down his face as he leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Marcus caught him before he fell. I've got you. It's okay. You did it. It's not okay. Henry's voice broke. It will never be okay, but at least now it's over. It's finally over. They returned to the cabin at 2 p.m. Lisa had stayed behind preparing lunch, trying to create some sense of normalcy in the midst of chaos. When she saw Henry's face, she didn't ask questions. She simply guided him to his chair, put a blanket over his legs, and handed him a cup of tea. Thank you, Henry whispered. Family takes care of family. Lisa sat beside him. That's what Grandma always said. Marcus watched them from the kitchen doorway. His sister. The old man who loved his grandmother. A bond forming between strangers who shared something deeper than blood. At 4 p.m., the phone rang. Marcus answered. Cole residence. Mr. Cole, this is Victoria Chen, from the consortium. Marcus's hand tightened on the receiver. I thought I made our position clear. You did, which is why I'm calling with a different proposal. Victoria's voice was businesslike, but there was something else underneath. Respect, desperation. The consortium has reconsidered its approach. We're no longer interested in purchasing the claims outright. Then what do you want? A partnership. We handle the extraction, the logistics, the permits. You and Mr. Crawford retain ownership and receive 60% of the profits. Why the change of heart? Because Eric Crawford is no longer a viable option, and because our lawyers have informed us that any attempt to challenge your ownership would fail spectacularly in court. Victoria paused. We're business people, Mr. Cole. We adapt. Send me the proposal in writing. Our lawyers will review it. Of course, but Mr. Cole, this is a limited time offer. There are other mining consortiums who would love to have this opportunity. Let them bid. Marcus hung up. Henry looked up from his chair. What was that about, Trondi? The consortium. They want to make a deal. What kind of deal, Marcus explained the proposal. Henry listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. 60%, the old man said. That would be hundreds of millions over the life of the operation. For the foundation, for Eleanor's legacy. Henry smiled. She would have liked that, using gold from these mountains to help people. That's exactly what she would have wanted. At 7 p.m., Marcus stepped outside to clear his head. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The same mountains Eleanor had watched. The same sunset Henry had dreamed about in a Vietnamese prison camp. Ranger followed him as always. 3 weeks, Mute, Marcus said to the dog. 3 weeks ago I came here to disappear, to figure out if living was still worth the effort. Ranger sat beside him, ears perked. You showed up at my door with a bullet in your shoulder, led me to Henry, uncovered 50 years of secrets. Marcus shook his head. If anyone had told me this story, I would have said they were crazy. The dog's tail wagged. But here we are. And for the first time since Afghanistan, Marcus paused, searching for the right words. For the first time, I think I might actually be okay. Ranger pressed his head against Marcus's leg. Thank you, Marcus whispered, for finding me when I didn't want to be found. At 9 p.m., a car pulled up to the cabin. Marcus was instantly alert, but Ranger's tail was wagging, which meant the visitor wasn't a threat. Deputy Chen stepped out of the patrol car, a bottle of wine in one hand and a smile on her face. Sheriff gave me the night off, she said. Thought I'd check on my favorite civilians. How's the head? Marcus asked, noting that the bandage from her injury was gone. Hard as ever. Doctor said the concussion was mild. I'll be back on duty next week. They sat on the porch together as Lisa poured wine and Henry told stories about Vietnam, about Eleanor, about the dreams they'd shared before everything fell apart. Deputy Chen listened with rapt attention. I've heard a lot of stories in my career, she said finally. But this one beats them all. Truth is stranger than fiction, Henry agreed, and love is stronger than time. That should be on a greeting card. Henry laughed, a real laugh full and warm. Maybe it should. At 11 p.m., the house grew quiet. Lisa had taken the spare bedroom. Deputy Chen had driven back to town with promises to visit again. Henry was asleep in his chair, the journal open on his chest, dreaming whatever an 82-year-old man dreams. Marcus sat alone by the fire ranger at his feet. He thought about the men he'd lost in Afghanistan, about the explosion that should have killed him, about the months of darkness that had followed the belief that survival was a punishment rather than a gift. He thought about Henry imprisoned for 50 years by grief, then imprisoned again by his own nephew. About Eleanor waiting her whole life for a man she thought was dead. He thought about fate, about chance, about a wounded dog who had dragged himself through a blizzard to find the one person who could help. The fire crackled. Ranger sighed contentedly. For the first time in a long time, Marcus Cole felt something he'd forgotten was possible. Peace. Not the absence of pain, not the erasure of memory, but the quiet certainty that tomorrow would come, and he would be ready to meet it. Henry stirred in his sleep, murmuring Eleanor's name. Marcus smiled and added another log to the fire. Outside, the Montana night stretched toward the mountains, and somewhere in those peaks, gold waited to be discovered. A fortune that would build hospitals and fund research and help veterans find their way home. Eleanor's gold, Henry's gold, a legacy of love that had survived war, separation, torture, and time. Some stories, Marcus realized, take 50 years to tell. But they were worth the wait. 6 months had changed everything. The snow that had covered the mountains when Marcus first found Ranger had long since melted. Spring had come and gone, and now summer blazed across the Montana wilderness with fierce, unapologetic heat. Marcus stood on the cabin porch at 6 a.m. watching the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of gold. Ranger sat beside him, healthier than he'd ever been, his coat gleaming, his amber eyes alert and content. Inside, Henry was already awake. The old man had become an early riser, something he attributed to decades of military discipline and prison camp survival. But Marcus knew the truth. Henry woke early to read Eleanor's journal by the first light of dawn, to feel close to her in the quiet hours before the world intruded. "Today's the day, Marcus said when Henry joined him on the porch. "Today's the day?" Henry agreed. His voice was steady, but Marcus could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. Eric Crawford's trial was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. After 6 months of legal maneuvering, psychiatric evaluations, and failed plea bargains, the case was finally going to court. The charges were extensive: kidnapping, aggravated assault, torture, attempted murder, and first-degree murder for the death of his father. The prosecution had requested life without parole. Eric's defense team had countered with claims of mental illness, childhood trauma, and diminished capacity. Today, the jury would begin hearing the evidence, and Henry Crawford would take the stand. At 7 a.m., Lisa arrived to drive them to the courthouse. She had moved to Montana 3 months earlier, taking a leave of absence from her job in Seattle to help care for Henry and support Marcus through the trial preparation. The siblings had grown closer than they'd been since childhood, united by shared purpose and the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. "How are you feeling?" Lisa asked Henry as she helped him into the car. "Old," Henry replied. "Tired. Determined. You don't have to do this. The prosecution said they can proceed without your testimony if necessary." "No?" Henry's voice hardened. "Eric looked me in the eye while he tortured me. He smiled while he cut off my finger. The jury needs to hear that. They need to understand what kind of monster they're dealing with." Ranger jumped into the back seat beside Henry, pressing close to the old man as if sensing his anxiety. Marcus climbed into the front and Lisa started the engine. The drive to the Missoula County Courthouse took 2 hours. They rode mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Marcus watched the landscape scroll past, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. A wounded dog. A blizzard? A cabin in the woods. 50 years of secrets unraveled in a matter of weeks. At 8:45 a.m. they arrived at the courthouse. The media presence was overwhelming. Reporters had been following the case for months, drawn by the sensational details, the torture, the buried gold, the 50-year love story. Camera crews lined the steps, and journalists shouted questions as Marcus helped Henry from the car. "Mr. Crawford, how does it feel to face your nephew in court?" "Mr. Cole, will you be testifying about the night you captured Eric Crawford? Is it true the mining claims are worth over $400 million? Marcus ignored them all, shielding Henry from the crush of bodies as Deputy Chen cleared a path to the courthouse doors. She had been assigned to their security detail for the duration of the trial, a role she took seriously. Vultures, Henry muttered as they entered the building. All of them. They're doing their jobs, Marcus replied. Just like we're doing ours. The courtroom was packed. Marcus spotted Rachel Crawford in the gallery, her face pale and drawn. She had visited Henry twice since their first meeting, slowly building a relationship with the great uncle she'd never known existed. Her presence today was complicated, torn between the desire to support Henry and the horror of watching her own father be tried for monstrous crimes. Sheriff Taylor sat near the front along with District Attorney Margaret Thornton, a formidable woman in her 60s who had built her career on prosecuting violent offenders. She had taken the Crawford case personally, appalled by the details of Henry's captivity, and there, at the defense table, sat Eric Crawford. He looked different than Marcus remembered. Prison had aged him, his hair had gone gray at the temples and deep lines creased his face, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, watching. When Eric saw Henry enter the courtroom, something flickered in those eyes. Recognition, hatred, and something else that might have been fear. All rise, the bailiff called, the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. The trial began. District Attorney Thornton's opening statement was methodical and devastating. She walked the jury through the evidence piece by piece, the torture, the imprisonment, the murder of Richard Crawford, the attempted murder of Marcus Cole and Deputy Chen. This is not a case of a desperate man making bad decisions, she concluded. This is a case of calculated, premeditated evil. Eric Crawford spent 3 years planning his crimes. He murdered his own father. He tortured his elderly uncle for months. He shot an innocent animal and left it to die. She turned to face Eric directly. And he did it all for money. $18 million. That's what he thought his uncle's suffering was worth. The defense attorney, a slick man named Harrison Webb, offered a different narrative. He painted Eric as a victim of childhood neglect, of unrealistic expectations of a mental health system that had failed him. My client is not a monster, Webb insisted. He is a sick man who needs treatment, not punishment. The prosecution wants you to see evil. I ask you to see illness. Marcus watched the jury's faces, trying to gauge their reactions. Some looked sympathetic to Webb's arguments. Others appeared skeptical. A few stared at Eric with undisguised contempt. At 11 a.m., the prosecution called its first witness, Sarah Mitchell, the forensic pathologist who had conducted the exhumation of Richard Crawford's body. The potassium chloride concentration in the tissue samples was consistent with a lethal injection, Dr. Mitchell testified. The puncture wound on the victim's arm was small enough to be missed during a standard autopsy, but under microscopic examination it was clearly visible. In your professional opinion, Dr. Mitchell, was Richard Crawford murdered? Yes, there is no natural explanation for these findings. Defense attorney Webb cross-examined aggressively, suggesting that the tissue samples could have been contaminated, that the puncture wound could have come from routine medical treatment. Dr. Mitchell held firm. I've conducted over 2,000 autopsies in my career. I know the difference between medical intervention and deliberate harm. At 1 p.m., after a brief lunch recess, the prosecution called Deputy Sarah Chen. Chen walked to the stand with confidence, her uniform pressed, her badge gleaming. She had been promoted to sergeant after the Crawford case recognition for her bravery during Eric's final assault on the cabin. Tell us what happened on the night of December 18th, Thornton instructed. Chen described the events in detail, the decoy campsite in the forest, Eric's attack on the cabin, her own injury and recovery, the gunshot that had saved Henry's life. When I woke up from being hit, I heard Mr. Crawford being dragged outside. I could hear Eric's voice. He was saying something about finishing what he started, about making sure there were no witnesses. What did you do then? I grabbed my service weapon and followed them to the porch. Eric had a gun to Mr. Crawford's head. Marcus Cole was 20 yards away, unable to get a clear shot, so I took one. You shot Eric Crawford? In the shoulder, enough to disarm him, not enough to kill. Chen's voice was steady. My job is to protect people, not execute them, even people who deserve it. The jury seemed impressed by Chen's testimony. Several nodded as she spoke, their expressions sympathetic. Webb's cross-examination tried to paint Chen as reckless, suggesting she could have killed Eric or accidentally hit Henry. Chen shut him down with clinical precision. I'm an expert marksman, Mr. Webb. I've qualified at the highest level for 8 consecutive years. My shot went exactly where I intended it to go. At 3 p.m., the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The prosecution calls Henry Crawford to the stand. Marcus helped Henry rise from his seat in the gallery. The old man walked slowly but steadily toward the witness stand, Ranger watching anxiously from his position at Marcus's feet. Henry placed his hand on the Bible. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Please state your name and relationship to the defendant. My name is Henry Crawford. Eric is my nephew. His father, Richard, was my brother. District Attorney Thornton approached the stand with a gentleness that contrasted with her earlier intensity. Mr. Crawford, can you tell the jury what happened on October 3rd of last year? Henry took a deep breath. I was at my home. Eric came to visit. Said he wanted to discuss family business. I let him in. What happened next? He drugged me. Something in the coffee he brought. When I woke up, I was in a cabin in the mountains, handcuffed to a bed. How long were you held in that cabin? 3 months, 94 days to be exact. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Several jurors leaned forward, their expressions horrified. During those 94 days, what did Eric Crawford do to you? Henry's hands trembled slightly. He looked at his right hand at the space where his pinky finger should have been. He tortured me, burned my fingertips with a hot poker, cut me with a surgical blade. He wanted something from me, documents related to mining claim I owned. When I wouldn't tell him where they were, he got more creative. Can you describe what you mean by creative? The finger was on day 32. Henry's voice was flat, controlled. He used a surgical blade, made me watch, told me I'd lose another one every week until I talked. A woman in the jury began to cry silently. Did Eric ever explain why he was doing this? Money. He said the mining claims were worth millions, said it was his birthright, said I was being selfish by not handing them over. Henry paused. He also told me he'd killed his father, my brother, made it look like a heart attack. Objection, Webb shot to his feet. That's hearsay and speculation. Overruled. Judge Morrison's voice was ice. The witness is describing statements made to him by the defendant. That's an admission, not hearsay. Henry continued. Eric said Richard was getting suspicious, asking too many questions about the estate, so Eric killed him, injected him with something that stopped his heart. How did Eric Crawford seem when he told you this? Was proud? The word came out like a curse. He was proud of himself, said his father had always underestimated him, said killing him was the smartest thing he'd ever done. The courtroom was silent. Eric Crawford sat motionless at the defense table, his face carefully blank. Mr. Crawford, what finally ended your captivity? Henry looked toward the gallery, finding Marcus in the crowd. A dog named Ranger. Eric shot him when he tried to protect me, but Ranger survived. He escaped and found help. He found Marcus Cole. Yes, Eleanor's grandson. Henry's voice caught on the name. Eleanor Porter. The woman I was engaged to before Vietnam. The woman I spent 50 years searching for. Can you explain that connection for the jury? Eleanor and I bought those mining claims together in 1968, before I shipped out, before I was captured and held prisoner for 5 years. Henry's eyes grew distant. When I came home, she was gone. I never found her. Didn't know she'd changed her name. Didn't know she'd spent the rest of her life living in these same mountains just miles away from me. And Marcus Cole is her grandson, a Marine captain who served in Afghanistan, a man who risked his life to save a stranger. Henry's voice strengthened. Ranger led him to me, against all odds, through a blizzard, with a bullet in his shoulder. That's quite a story, Mr. Crawford. It's the truth. Henry looked at the jury. I've told a lot of lies in my life. We all have, but this isn't one of them. Eric Crawford tortured me for 3 months. He murdered my brother. He tried to kill me, Marcus, and Deputy Chen. And he did it all because he believed money was more important than human life. District Attorney Thornton turned to the defense table. Your witness, Mr. Webb. Harrison Webb approached the stand with caution. He knew the jury was already sympathetic to Henry. Attacking the elderly victim directly would backfire badly. Mr. Crawford, you mentioned you were a POW in Vietnam. How long were you held captive? 5 years? 5 years, Webb nodded sympathetically. That must have been a traumatic experience. It was. And you've struggled with PTSD since then, nightmares, flashbacks. I have. Is it possible that your perception of events in that cabin was influenced by your past trauma, that perhaps what you remember isn't exactly what happened? Henry stared at Webb with something close to contempt. I remember my nephew cutting off my finger, Mr. Webb. I remember watching him do it while he hummed Happy Birthday. I remember him telling me he killed his father. There's no trauma that could make me imagine that. But memory is imperfect. My memory is fine. Henry's voice rose. Do you want to see the finger, because I have what's left of it preserved. The doctors saved it when they treated me at the hospital. Physical evidence, Mr. Webb, not memory. Webb retreated quickly. No further questions, Your Honor. At 5 p.m., court adjourned for the day. The prosecution had more witnesses to call, more evidence to present, but the damage had been done. Henry Crawford's testimony had eviscerated the defense's claims of mental illness and diminished capacity. The jury had seen a victim. They had heard a monster described in detail. Outside the courthouse, Marcus helped Henry into the car. The old man was exhausted, drained by the ordeal of reliving his captivity in front of strangers. "You did good," Marcus said. "You told the truth." The truth. Henry closed his eyes. "Do you know what Eric said to me once during one of the sessions? He said, truth doesn't matter. Said the only thing that matters is what people believe." He was wrong. I know, but it scared me. The certainty in his voice, like he genuinely believed that reality was whatever he could make other people accept. Henry opened his eyes. "That's what makes him dangerous, Marcus, not the violence. The conviction that he can reshape the world to suit his needs." The trial continued for 2 more weeks. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, financial records, phone messages, and expert testimony. The defense called psychiatrists who diagnosed Eric with various disorders, attempting to build a case for mental incapacity. On the 13th day, Eric Crawford took the stand in his own defense. It was a risky move, one that surprised most legal observers. But Eric was convinced he could charm the jury, convince them that he wasn't a monster, just a troubled man who had made terrible mistakes. He was wrong. Under cross-examination, District Attorney Thornton systematically dismantled Eric's carefully constructed narrative. She confronted him with his own messages, his own admissions, his own words recorded in Henry's journal. "You wrote to the consortium that the old problem had been resolved," Thornton said. "What old problem was that, Mr. Crawford?" "I don't recall specifically." "Let me refresh your memory. This message was sent 3 days after your father's death. The old problem that was resolved was your father, wasn't it?" Eric's composure cracked. "My father was sick. He had a heart condition." "A heart condition that mysteriously killed him right when he started asking questions about your handling of the estate. How convenient." "I didn't kill my father." "Then who did? Who injected him with potassium chloride? Who left that puncture mark on his arm?" Thornton leaned in. "Because someone did, Mr. Crawford. The forensic evidence is clear, and you were the only one who benefited." Eric's mask shattered completely, his face contorted with rage. "You don't understand. That old man was going to ruin everything. 50 years those claims sat there worthless. I was the one who discovered their value. I was the one who found buyers. It was my work. So you killed him. He was going to give it all to charity, said he didn't need the money, said he wanted to honor some woman he hadn't seen in decades. My inheritance, my future." The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged her gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. Eric Crawford had just confessed in open court to murdering his father. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Life without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, Eric Crawford showed no emotion. He simply stared straight ahead, as if the word guilty had no meaning to him, as if the life he'd destroyed, the people he'd hurt, were nothing more than obstacles that had unfortunately gotten in his way. Henry wept silently in the gallery. Lisa held his hand. Marcus sat motionless, feeling something he hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Just emptiness. Justice had been served, but justice couldn't give Henry back his finger. Couldn't give back the 50 years he'd spent searching for Eleanor. Couldn't resurrect Richard Crawford or undo the months of torture. Some wounds, Marcus realized, never fully heal. The best you can do is learn to live with them. 3 months later, the Eleanor Porter Crawford Foundation held its official launch. The ceremony took place on the grounds of the cabin, now expanded and renovated to serve as the foundation's headquarters. Over 200 people attended: veterans, animal rescue advocates, families of POWIA's local officials, and journalists who had covered the case. Marcus stood at the podium looking out at the crowd. Beside him sat Henry in a wheelchair now, but sharp as ever. Ranger lay at Henry's feet, a service dog vest identifying his official role. 6 months ago, Marcus began, I came to this cabin to disappear. I was broken, lost, convinced that the world was better off without me in it. The crowd was silent, attentive. Then a dog showed up at my door, wounded, dying, with a bullet in his shoulder and a determination I couldn't ignore. Marcus paused. Ranger saved my life that night, not just by giving me purpose, but by leading me to a man who would become family. He looked at Henry. Henry Crawford spent 50 years searching for the woman he loved. My grandmother, Eleanor Porter. They were separated by war, by circumstance, by a world that didn't care about their happiness. But they never stopped loving each other. Eleanor kept Henry's mining claims safe for half a century. She kept his letters, his photographs, his engagement ring. She kept hope alive even when she thought he was dead. Marcus's voice caught. And now, thanks to those claims, we're going to help others find hope too. He gestured to the banner, hanging behind him, the Eleanor Porter Crawford Foundation. This foundation will support veterans struggling with PTSD. It will fund animal rescue operations across the country. It will provide resources for families of missing service members, helping them find answers and closure. Because that's what Eleanor and Henry would have wanted. Not gold for its own sake, but gold transformed into something meaningful, something lasting, something that honors the love they shared. Henry rose slowly from his wheelchair, waving off Marcus's offer of help. He walked to the podium with careful steps, Ranger padding beside him. "I'm 83 years old," Henry said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "I've survived war prison camps, torture, and betrayal. I've lost more than most people can imagine." He placed his hand on the podium, the missing finger visible to everyone watching. "But I've also found more than I ever dared to hope. A family I didn't know I had. A purpose I thought was gone. And the knowledge that the woman I loved never forgot me." He turned to look at the cabin behind him. Eleanor spent her last years in this place watching these mountains, waiting for something she couldn't name. I like to think she was waiting for me, for this moment, for the day when our story would finally have an ending. Henry's eyes glistened. This foundation is that ending. Not with death or regret, but with hope, with help, with love transformed into action. He looked at Marcus. "My grandson says I saved him, but the truth is he saved me. Him and a stubborn dog who refused to give up." Ranger barked once as if on cue. The crowd laughed through their tears. "Eleanor Porter loved me for 50 years without ever seeing me again. That's the kind of love that changes the world. And starting today, that love will live on through every veteran we help, every animal we rescue, every family we reunite." Henry raised his hand, the engagement ring glinting on his finger. "For Eleanor, for always." The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, Marcus found a quiet moment alone with Henry. They sat on the porch together, watching the sunset that Eleanor had watched thousands of times before them. Ranger lay between them, content and peaceful. "Do you think she knows?" Henry asked quietly. "Wherever she is. Do you think she knows we found each other?" Marcus considered the question. He wasn't religious, wasn't sure what he believed about life after death, or cosmic justice, or any of it. But sitting here in the cabin Eleanor had loved with the man she had never stopped waiting for, he felt something. A presence. A warmth. A sense that somehow, somewhere, she was watching. "I think she knows," he said. Henry smiled. "I think so too." They sat in silence as the sun sank below the mountains. The same mountains that had hidden gold for millions of years. The same mountains that had witnessed a love story spanning half a century. At 9 p.m., Rachel Crawford arrived. She had been coming regularly since the trial, slowly building a relationship with the great-uncle her father had tried to destroy. Tonight she carried a small box wrapped in ribbon. "I found this in my grandmother's things," she said, handing it to Henry. "Dad's mother. She passed away 10 years ago, but Dad kept all her belongings in storage." Henry opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph, black and white, faded with age. 2 young men in military uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. "That's my grandfather," Rachel said. "And the other one is me?" Henry's voice broke. "Richard and I. Basic training, 1966. He traced his brother's face with his finger. The brother Eric had murdered. The brother who had once been his best friend. "I didn't know this existed," Henry whispered. "I thought you should have it." Rachel sat down beside him. "I know it doesn't make up for anything, but you two were brothers. That meant something even if Dad tried to destroy it." Henry looked at the young woman. Eric's daughter. Richard's granddaughter. Family despite everything. "Thank you," he said. "This means more than you know." At 11 p.m., Marcus made a phone call he'd been avoiding for months. "Cole." The voice on the other end was gruff, familiar. Colonel James Morrison, Marcus's former commanding officer. "Sir, it's Marcus." "I know who it is. Been wondering when you'd finally call." "I wasn't ready before." "And now, huh?" Marcus looked out the window at the Montana night. "Now I think I might be." The nightmares. Still there, but quieter. The guilt, Still there too, but I'm learning to carry it. Colonel Morrison was quiet for a moment. I've been following the news, the Crawford case. That foundation you're starting. It felt right, honoring something good instead of drowning in something bad. Sounds like you've done some healing, son. Some. Still a work in progress. We all are. Morrison's voice softened. The boys who died that day. Thompson, Garcia, Williams, Okonkwo. You know what they'd say if they could see you now? Marcus's throat tightened. What? They'd say, get off your ass and live. They'd say, stop wasting the time they don't have. They'd say, make it mean something. I'm trying. I know you are. That foundation, the work you're doing, that's exactly what they'd want. Morrison paused. You didn't die in that convoy for a reason, Marcus. Maybe this is it. The call ended. Marcus sat in the darkness thinking about Thompson's laugh, Garcia's terrible jokes, William's obsession with chess, Okonkwo's letters to his daughter. They were gone. Nothing could change that. But maybe their deaths didn't have to be meaningless. Maybe Marcus could live enough for all of them. The first anniversary of Ranger's arrival came on a bitter January night. Marcus marked it quietly, sitting by the fire with Henry and the dog who had started everything. Outside, another blizzard raged, reminding them all of the storm that had changed their lives. 1 year, Henry said. Hard to believe. A lot can happen in a year. A lot did happen. Henry stroked Ranger's fur. Eric is in prison. The Foundation is thriving. The mining operation is providing funds beyond anything we imagined. And you're still here, Henry smiled. Still here, against all odds. Ranger lifted his head, looking at each of them in turn, those amber eyes that had seen so much, that had guided Marcus through a blizzard, that had kept watch over Henry through months of torture. You know what I've been thinking about, Marcus said. Fate, whether things happen for a reason or if it's all just chance. What do you think? I used to think it was all random, the explosion that killed my squad, the shrapnel in my spine, surviving when others didn't. Fit from vehicles, Marcus paused. But then Ranger showed up, and everything that happened after feels like more than coincidence. It does. Henry nodded slowly. I've had 50 years to think about fate, about why I survived Vietnam when so many didn't, about why Eleanor and I were kept apart for so long. Any conclusions? 1. Henry met Marcus's eyes. It doesn't matter whether fate is real or not. What matters is what we do with the time we're given, how we treat the people we meet, whether we add light to the world or darkness. And Eric? Eric chose darkness. He convinced himself that money was more important than people, that his desires mattered more than others' lives. Henry's voice hardened. That's not fate. That's choice, and he'll live with those choices for the rest of his life. At midnight, Marcus went outside. The blizzard had passed, leaving the world covered in pristine white. The stars blazed overhead, brilliant and cold. He thought about the year that had passed, the healing, the growth, the unexpected family he'd found in an old man and a remarkable dog. He thought about Eleanor, who had waited her whole life for someone who would never come, about Henry, who had searched the world for someone who was right next door, about the tragedy of their separation and the bittersweet beauty of their legacy. And he thought about himself. The man he had been 12 months ago, broken and hopeless. The man he was becoming scarred but stronger. Ranger appeared beside him, pressing against his leg in the cold. 1 year, Marcus said to the dog. 1 year since you showed up and changed everything. Ranger's tail wagged. I never thanked you properly, for finding me, for not giving up, for being stubborn enough to drag yourself through a blizzard with a bullet in your shoulder. The dog looked up at him with those knowing amber eyes. You saved 3 lives that night, mine, Henry's, and your own. Marcus knelt down eye to eye with the animal who had become his closest companion. I don't know if dogs understand gratitude, but I'm grateful, every single day. Ranger licked his face. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying across the silent mountains. A year ago, he hadn't thought he was capable of laughter. Now it came naturally easily, like something that had been locked away and finally set free. He stood up and looked at the cabin. Through the window, he could see Henry by the fire reading Eleanor's journal, as he did every night. The old man was smiling. This was home now. Not just a place, but a purpose. A family forged from tragedy and connected by love that refused to die. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Foundation was expanding. The mining operation required oversight. There were veterans to help animals, to rescue families, to reunite. But tonight, Marcus Cole stood under the Montana stars and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Ranger barked once, then trotted back toward the cabin. Marcus followed, ready for whatever came next. Because some stories take 50 years to finish. Some wounds take decades to heal. Some love survives war, separation, torture, and time. And sometimes in the darkest moments, when hope seems lost and the future looks empty, a wounded dog appears at your door, refusing to give up, leading you toward a destiny you never imagined. That's the truth Marcus Cole learned in the mountains of Montana. That's the truth Henry Crawford discovered after 50 years of searching. That's the legacy Eleanor Porter left behind. Love endures. Hope survives. And the darkest nights always end with dawn.